Okay, so we are officially being recorded, and so I will kick it off to Sue, and we look forward to the next hour with everyone.
Thanks so much, Gina. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third Supporting Student Success webinar focused on the hybrid approach. Before going into the meat of the presentation, I'd like to introduce the presenters today. So the presenters are myself, project director with Manhattan Strategy Group. We're the contracting company that is leading the effort for the Department of Education's two-year investment. We also will be joined by Deborah Bragg, who is with the University of Washington Community College Research Initiatives. You probably are aware of Deborah's work through the Office of Community College Research and Leadership as well. And she was also one of our advisory group members. And then lastly, we are joined by Diane Lee, who is the academic lead for MoSTEM Wins at St. Louis Community College. And MoSTEM Wins is a tax grant, so she'll be talking more about that in her Adult Learning Academy program. Okay, so, all right, let's just kind of get into really I think the focus and the agenda of today's presentation. So what we'll be doing today is that we'll share with you background about the Supporting Student Success Project, what are we doing, how we started doing this, and where are we now. And Deborah will go into the details about, some of the challenges really from the perspective of learners. She'll share some supporting research on the program models, and then Diane's going to hone in on her project at St. Louis Community College. So we have a bright spotlight on St. Louis Community College. We'll also talk about what's next and preview, our other activities that are happening. And then really what we would like to do is have, a question and answer period towards the end. So I think Gina mentioned this, but as we're presenting, if questions are coming up, please feel free to pose the questions so that we, we can tee up the questions for everybody towards the end. And if you can, you should feel comfortable to include your affiliation, because that helps us in sort of, identifying the questions as well. Okay, so what is supporting student success? I mentioned earlier, this is a Department of Education Octane investment for 2 years. We're on our second year. The purpose of this program is really twofold. Really, first, it's to focus on strengthening the coordination of adult education and developmental education programming at community colleges. The second focus is to support community college learners so that they're better prepared for the workforce. And how we're really doing that is we're looking at examples and capturing examples of the extent to which adult education is coordinating, partnering, and aligning with DevEd at community colleges, because these two entities, often in different departments, often serve learners of the same characteristics, and there's really interesting examples out there that we've identified. And I just want to give a quick shout out to the 4 sites that we've identified for this effort. Gateway Community College out of New Haven, Connecticut for acceleration, LaGuardia Community College out of New York for contextualization, student support out of, Amarillo College for student support out of Amarillo, Texas, and of course, St. Louis Community College for hybrid program approaches. So let's move into project overview. So just to kind of share how we got to where we are, a lot of this has been driven by a process and a methodology that we developed. So it's a 2-year project. essentially the first year we looked at unlocking the gate, which was our evidence base to really tease out the most important program elements that was identified in this research. And we did that and basically used this information to develop rubrics that allowed us to take on, an information and documentation review of schools. And then what we ended up doing in the first year was to get ready for the site selection process. We worked with the department to identify different types of factors that were really important, not just factors as in they're doing things and it's really amazing, but more factors along the lines of general representation of, community colleges across the country. So, on balance, factors such as diversity, geographic representation, existence of statewide levers or existing initiatives, that have, been sort of infused in the state. So initiatives such as accelerating opportunity or, community colleges being recipients of tax grants, so that there was some leveraging, examples being considered. So what the Manhattan Strategy Group did was we used these factors, we identified schools in conjunction with the department that were relatively representative of different types of examples around the country. We conducted interviews and documentation reviews based on our rubrics with the schools themselves to really, I think, pull out some of the examples of adult education coordination with DevEd. And we did this, working very closely with research professionals, basically our advisory group. They're, folks who are very immersed in community college research and evaluation and trends, and they were helping to guide, some of the conversation around promising practices. Our advisory group members, I just want to, to give them a shout out and to give them a round of applause as well, include Dr. Deborah Bragg, Melinda Karp, Michelle Van Noy, and Catherine Hughes. So kind of jumping into the second year, so where we are now, and you'll hear more about this later on in the presentation, because we'll share with you when our last webinar is taking place, and also the release of the videos. But we're in our second year now, and we're essentially we'll be rolling out, and we have been rolling out information about our findings. So some of the things we've been doing this past year, you might have seen both at on links in our communities of practice, as well as prior webinars. But Gina and I have also, been presenting at various conferences around the country as well. So with all of that said, I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Bragg to talk more about, the learners and also the promising practices for programs.
Thank you, Sue. It's a real pleasure to be with everyone today and to get to share a little bit of the research perspective. A lot has happened in this area of developmental education and the community college context over the last several years. And you pointed to the beginning kind of setting the stage for this work with the Unlocking the Gate project that was a very nice synthesis of a lot of research that had happened up to about 5 years ago. And when I look at that and reread that report in preparing for this, it reminded me of where we are at that point and how far we've come. And I would comment that I think you mentioned the TAC grants. Those grants, evaluation is still emerging, but in many cases they have helped to provide impetus for some of this change, and it's going to be exciting to hear Diane Lee talk today about the work that she's been leading there in St. Louis, because it is very wedded to the resources that that we were able to get. I wanted to also acknowledge that I am the third-party evaluator for Missouri's TAC grants, and I do that work with John and Maggie Cosgrove, who I think are also listening on this call. And so some of what I'll be sharing and what maybe Diane will be sharing comes from that. Let me just start. When we talk about the challenge, we all know that many students who come to the community college are not adequately prepared. And there's many reasons for that, and we understand that. I think one thing that we want to share, and I believe Diane will echo this, is it's really in many ways the system that has let students down. It's not the students' fault that they're not prepared in many cases. And we want to distinguish that perspective in our work, in our research, and our evaluation, and in the work that the folks at St. Louis did, because the model, the hybrid model that Diane is going to share, is a very affirming, pro-student way of thinking about preparing students and helping them really move forward with their lives, and it is quite a comprehensive model. So let's move to the next slide then, and just highlight for you a little bit of what some of the major models are of developmental education. So if we can have the next slide. So as we know, unfortunately, academic preparation also impacts student completion. And we know from the research that, you know, the less prepared a student is when they arrive at the community college, the more challenging it is to complete their programs and receive credentials that they need to move into the labor market. So that's really the crux of the issue. And as I was saying, over the last decade or so, we've seen a lot of developmental education reform emerge. And in the Unlocking the Gate project, they talk about some major areas of reform, including acceleration, contextualization, student support, and then hybrid models that use multiple strategies. Just quickly, acceleration is referring to compressed curriculum or modularized curriculum, where students have more autonomy in many respects to really address the basic skills needs that they have so they can move forward. So we're trying to reduce the time and the cost for students and focus on what they really need to learn in order to pursue a college level credential. And this model was identified by Unlocking the Gate as a promising model and is very evident in many of the TAC grants and in other reforms that have followed over the last few years. Contextualization is, I'm sure many who are listening on this call would recognize that contextualization is something that's really a very old idea. But in the context of developmental education, it's about integrating those basics in math and science with some of the content that students really need to learn, and often that's in occupational and technical areas, but it doesn't have to be. Curriculum can be contextualized in many different ways to help students relate to it better, to help motivate them, and help them see the relevance of what they're learning in the basic skills areas so that they can move on and pursue the programs of study and credentials that they need. There's many, many ways to do this. as I'm sure Diane will share. We've learned a lot then in the support, student support area about the support students need in order to pursue their academic programs of study. In the developmental area, you'll recognize tutoring, cohort models, intrusive advising, and other ways to think about supporting students to meet their goals, and doing that often in a way that's more individualized and attentive to students' needs so they can be successful. And then finally, the area Diane Lee will be talking about was the leadership of St. Louis Community College is really hybrid models that in many respects pick up the very best of all of these approaches and blend them into a curriculum and into instruction that really helps to meet the needs of adult learners. So I think with that, I'm going to pass the torch to my good friend Diane Lee so you all can hear about the great work they're doing in St. Louis.
Thank you very much, Deborah, and thank you to Sue and Gina. I have to share with everyone who's participating how happy we were in St. Louis to be included in the Supporting Student Success project. And with tremendous enthusiasm, we do enjoy sharing all that we've done through our various TACT grants, but we also very much enjoy and appreciate the opportunity to hear what other schools are doing, and it has been great to meet individuals from the other 3 community colleges who were part of this project, and there's always best practices to share, but also best practices to learn about and include in our programs. So I want to start by giving you just a little bit of history about our Adult Learning Academy. As you've heard, our funding for what we call the ALA came through the TACT grants. And St. Louis has been very, very lucky to receive TACT grant funding in all 4 rounds. And much of what I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon came out of our first TACT grant, which was called Mo Health Wins, and it was a consortium of the 12 community colleges in Missouri and 1 state technical college. And everything was associated with healthcare, so our Adult Learning Academy for round 1 was contextualized to healthcare. Our round 1 grant, those who wrote the grant for the state, it was our first effort at a TACT grant, incorporated 16 different strategies. I can tell you that our round 4 grant has 3. So 16 was a large number, but if it hadn't been for our leadership choosing so many diverse strategies, we wouldn't have a hybrid program in St. Louis. So looking back on it, although it was challenging, I'm very, very glad that there were so many strategies involved. That's what allowed us to look to developing curriculum that was accelerated, that did compress content, that did look for ways to reduce time for students to complete their developmental education requirements. We contextualized the curriculum to healthcare for our round 1 grant. For round 2, it was contextualized to manufacturing. Round 3 focused on transportation, and round 4 is our STEM grant, but we also maintained healthcare as part of our STEM programs of study. So we've had quite a bit of experience with contextualizing along various different sectors. And then student support was an essential component of what we built in St. Louis. The Adult Learning Academy, without that intrusive student support model would look very different, and I'm confident that our outcomes would be very different. And I'll talk a little bit more about student support in just a minute. I also wanted to share that at the time we received our first TACT grant, we were a relatively new community college participating in a national effort known as Achieving the Dream. And Achieving the Dream is nationwide. It's a very comprehensive approach to improve success for all students in the community college system, with a special focus on low-income students and students of color, which aligned very closely to the TACT strategies and priorities. Because of our involvement in Achieving the Dream, there had already been a lot of data collected in St. Louis and a lot of data analysis about, who were we serving, what were our retention rates, what were our completion rates, where were we falling short, and our faculty had already been working very hard on developmental education redesign teams. We had teams for each of the 3 disciplines that we focused on: reading, writing, and mathematics. And I was able to, once we received the TACT funding, go to these committee meetings and speak to the faculty about all of the work that they had been doing, the data they had been looking at, and asking for volunteers to step forward who wanted to help build, develop, design, implement, and teach in a different model. And we had individuals step forward who had very strong backgrounds in developmental education and come together and build our model. And I want to say that at the time, I certainly, as project director, did not realize that what we were attempting to develop would be a very robust adult basic ed program. And I'm sure many of those participating on the webinar today who come from the adult basic ed perspective, will smile that, of course, that's what we were doing. Our focus was on academic basics, on remediating adults who wanted to pursue a post-secondary credential, who needed some upskilling in one or more of those 3 discipline areas. And I've come to respect the ABE side very significantly through this work. I do think that additional coordination with our adult basic ed colleagues would really benefit what's happening within the community colleges. And in the last year, we have done a lot to reach out to ABE professionals in our community, and we have visited some of the ABE sites and have invited those teachers to come in and visit our Adult Learning Academy. I think that more collaboration, more partnering is going to help us truly serve our communities in a much more beneficial way. From the beginning, those faculty who stepped forward had a vision that included college ready and career ready. We didn't see any distinction really in preparing an adult to be successful in a post-secondary training program as being different from incorporating in those basic academic skills that someone would need to bring into an entry-level career. So we stayed very focused on that vision, and we built what has become a very, very collaborative approach. And if we go to the next slide, I'll share a little bit more detail about our Adult Learning Academy. So it is a competency-based program. Students cannot succeed in the ALA until they have mastered all of the student learning outcomes. That's one very important distinction from a credit-based developmental education course, because a student, for example, could come into a basic math course, a 3-credit-hour course at the community college, and fail the chapters on fractions or decimals, but still have an average at the end of the course that allowed them to move on to the next course. And that's part of why we see students churning in our developmental education courses. So we require students to demonstrate mastery of all of the student learning outcomes, and the student learning outcomes are aligned to the developmental education courses, not just one level below college ready, but we went to 2 levels below college ready. And all of those students will come into the same classroom. We divide math. Math meets Mondays and Wednesdays. Our reading and writing, we integrated, which at the college, reading and writing have been separate disciplines, which I think in many ways contributed to students struggling in the reading and writing courses on the credit side. But our faculty worked very, very hard, and I can tell you the first iteration of our Adult Learning Academy literacy curriculum was not fully integrated, but over the last 4 years we have gotten to the point where now it is a fully integrated approach. Literacy meets on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The Adult Learning Academy classroom is open from 9 a.m. until 3 p.m. and students are encouraged to stay for the entire time. A minimum requirement is 4 hours within that 6-hour block, and so for the week the minimum would be 8 hours. We have many students who do attend for the full time that the Adult Learning Academy is open. We also encourage students who are perhaps only in the math component to come to campus Tuesdays and Thursdays and Fridays. We have another lab where they can work. All of the curriculum is available through our learning management system, so they don't necessarily have to be in the ALA classroom. Our teachers are not lecturing. This is definitely not a lecture type environment. The students work, some of them one-on-one, some of them might work in small groups. All of the curriculum is technology enabled. On the math side, we're using Khan Academy. We embed links to specific lessons, videos, or tutorials right into our learning management system. On the literacy side, we're using an open educational resource called Smart English, and it has been great for our students to be able to take advantage of open educational resources. Our teachers and our educational assistants are professional staff, many of whom came from our adjunct faculty. They walk throughout the room, help students one-on-one. It's very flexible. We have rolling admissions, so every 2 weeks we are bringing in new students into the classroom. So at any given point in time, we have students in the classroom who are at very different places within that curriculum. And we really do let them move at their own pace. We started out referring to the ALA as self-paced. Now we often use the term flexibly paced because we do give students milestones that we want them to strive to meet. Many of our students are able to move very quickly because they really are focusing on what they need. If they demonstrate mastery of the first 3 units of the math curriculum, we're not going to make them spend a lot of time with that material like they would in a traditional developmental education for credit class. once the students have completed their Adult Learning Academy course, they have fulfilled their developmental education requirements for the college. And so we are able to move students much more quickly into a workforce training program. And it could be on the credit side of the college or the non-credit side. Every one of our students is assigned a career pathway coach when they begin. The career pathway coach sits with the student, looks at their assessments, because part of our intake process, we're a little bit assessment heavy. We do use an assessment called Work Keys, which is looking at basic math. It looks at reading and locating information. Work Keys is designed to assess someone's readiness for a job, a specific occupation. So we use Work Keys. We also have used Compass and now AccuPlacer, which are very common college placement exams. And again, we're looking at reading, math, and writing. We're also using a digital literacy assessment and a keyboarding assessment. So our career pathway coach meets with each student, spends an hour to an hour and a half with that student, looking at the assessment results, talking to the student about their background. What has been their previous experience in school? What has been their employment background? What are their career goals? So we're looking at where they are, where they want to be, and helping them chart their pathway to accomplish those goals. And that's just the beginning of what we call intrusive student support. So throughout their program, not just the Adult Learning Academy, but even on into their workforce training program, that coach is going to be with that student to help mentor them through. And again, without that career pathway coach, we would not have the success rates that we've had. The coach is considered part of the instructional team. The coach has a relationship, obviously, with the student, but the coach also is in relationship with the instructional team. And that collaborative approach has done, I think, wonders to help our students succeed. And we have been able to reduce time to completion and increase our success rates. And I think our next slide will show you that. So these results are taken from our Round 1 grant. Round 1, not only did we have 16 strategies, but we also said we were going to serve 855 students. So we have a pretty big pool to look at when we go back to our Round 1 data. Our ALA pre-algebra course, the average time to complete was 7 weeks, and we had a 69% success rate. So this is in comparison to, on the credit developmental education side, what would have been a 16-week course, and the success rates at the time we started this for the college were on, some semesters down in the 40% range. On the ALA literacy side, we collapsed or compressed 4 courses into one integrated course in the Adult Learning Academy. So 2 levels of English focused on writing, 2 levels of reading. Our average completion time was 15 weeks, and we had a 42% success rate. That may not sound like an improvement, but it actually was an improvement, because students who tested into multiple developmental education courses, we had, I think, a 6% success rate of students who tested into all 3 DevEd subject areas completing within 2 years, just their developmental education requirements. Under the Most STEM Wins grant, which is our Round 4 grant, the faculty have continued to make adaptations to the curriculum, and they now are experiencing a 72% success rate. The time to complete still remains close to 15 weeks, but this has been a very significant improvement in our outcomes. A little bit more about TACT eligibility, so you know who it was we were serving. To be eligible for service under a TACT grant, a student had to present as unemployed, underemployed based on their education level, trade impacted, low skilled, which meant on those work keys or the college placement exam testing below college level, or a veteran. And in St. Louis, the majority of those students that we served were chronically unemployed and low-skilled adults. So of those who successfully completed the Adult Learning Academy prior to joining our program, 65% were unemployed, 74% African American, and 70% 25 and older. So we were working with not a recent high school graduate population, but an adult population. And after the ALA, 44% went on to complete a workforce training program, 41% enrolled in credit courses, and 76% were employed. And those employment statistics are really significant. And so if we go to the next slide. So this is one of the slides that came from Cosgrove and Associates. And Cosgrove and Associates for our round 1 grant were our internal researchers, also for round 2, and now in round 4 with Dr. Bragg, they are our third-party evaluators. And so they have access to the UI wage data, and they were able to determine that 126 of our Adult Learning Academy participants started as unemployed and had developmental education needs in 2 or more academic areas. And actually, when you look at those students who are in our Adult Learning Academy, 100% of the students who participated in the ALA literacy course were also in the ALA math course. So the bulk of our students tested into developmental education in 2 or 3 of the academic areas. And 76% were employed after the ALA program with an annual average wage of $24,500. We celebrate this. This is a huge, huge positive outcome. And if you go to the next slide, I have another statistic to share. I cannot talk about the right side as I'm looking at the slide because I'm not the researcher, I'm not the statistician. It's there for those of you who understand how to do these kinds of statistics, but there was a control group that was part of the TACT grants, and what our researchers found was that ALA participants nearly 12 times more likely to complete a college credential and secure employment when compared to the traditional DevEd students. And again, we celebrate this success. So thank you very much. And I hope that we get a lot of questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Diane. So that was a lot of information, and I saw some questions starting to come in. So before we get into the questions, wanted to share with you some of our efforts that are coming up. So there's one more webinar in our Student Success series, which is May 9th, and this one will feature Amarillo College. So just look for the information once it gets announced through links. And we are in the process of developing videos with accompanying discussion guides. There will be 3 videos that will be coming out later this summer. One is going to be focused on managing change and looking at promising practices at both Amarillo College and Gateway College to help students. Another one is on professional development, and will feature some of the work that's happening in Amarillo on the Poverty Initiative. And then the last video will focus on integrating adult education and developmental education. So really, I think digging in on some of the experiences through Diane's program and at ALA. So we're going to now move into the questions portion of our webinar.
And so, we seem to have a lot coming in, so thank you guys so much. So I'm going to do this chronologically, and then if there are reiterative questions. But Diane, we have a lot of questions for you. The first one being, a lot of people may not be super familiar with the term intrusive. When you speak of intrusive student support, it also sounds kind of negative. So can you elaborate on what you mean by intrusive student support?
Yes, I can share that we were told, we heard from some that they didn't really like that word intrusive and that maybe we should use the word intentional instead of intrusive, but our team felt like we really did need to be sometimes intrusive with the students. And so intrusive in terms of, I'll give you some examples. When someone was going through the intake process and they're brought into the program, that first meeting with the coach might look at their prior academic experience and see that they weren't very successful, and try to talk to the student about, well, what happened. And it's not going to be a surprise, I don't think, to anybody on the webinar that often it was childcare, it was transportation, might be elder care. And so our coach is going to really work with that student to say, well, what are you going to do differently this time? If it's childcare, tell me what your arrangements are. Oh, it's your mom or your sister. What are you going to do when they're not available? And really work with that student to have 3 layers of plans in place. How are you planning to get back and forth to school? Oh, now I have a car. Okay, what are you going to do when your car doesn't start? What are you going to do if your car, ends up in the shop for a couple of weeks? Do you have a bus schedule? Have you looked into what the bus route's going to be? So I think intrusive student support is on the front end doing a lot more work to make sure that student is able to address all of the barriers that get in the way. What are the common barriers to retention? It's often, life. It may not be anything having to do with academics in the classroom. It's life getting in the way. So our career pathway coach is an academic advisor, but whereas the typical academic advisor at a community college might spend 15 to 20 minutes with a student, and basically what they're doing is helping them with their schedule and making sure they're only taking courses that apply to the credential they're seeking, our coach is going to do much more than that. We are going to address those academic areas, but we're also going to look at the life challenge areas. And one other thing I will tell you about the Adult Learning Academy that I believe has contributed to success: when life gets in the way, and it does, your child is sick, or we've had a number of students who've had babies while they were in the program. They're out for a short period of time, and when they come back and they say, well, what have I missed? They haven't missed anything because they pick up where they left off. In a traditional credit-based course, they might have to start over again if they missed 3, 4, or 5 weeks. But with our program, they don't have to start over again. They pick up where they were, and that has also made a huge difference. But that's just some of the example of intrusive student support. And then when you go to that relationship between the coach and the student, the coach and the instructional team, if a student is absent, the coach knows. If the student academically isn't doing well, the coach knows, and the coach is going to get in touch with that student right away, what's happening. So it's an early alert system, but it's not an early alert system like what traditionally happens at the community college, where maybe at 4 weeks there's an early alert that happens, so it's once a semester. This is an ongoing oversight to make sure that our student has what they need to be successful. And our coach doesn't do things for the student, but our coach will make sure the student knows how to access the resources they need to get the community services they need, whether it's childcare, transportation, tutoring, so that they can be successful. And often it's about accompaniment. It's not about doing it for someone, it's accompaniment as they learn to be empowered to do it themselves, which they are.
Okay, great, Diane. The next question that we have, is there a cost associated with the ALA, and if so, how do you tackle that?
As of right now, there is no cost associated with the Adult Learning Academy because it's all funded through our TACT grants. We were able to scale the ALA to one of another campus this last year through a corporate donation. We have no way right now of knowing if that kind of support will continue in the future. I think the college is looking at opportunities to try to sustain the Adult Learning Academy when the TACT funding ends, which is March of 2018. That's when we'll stop serving students. So the reason right now for developmental education to be on the credit side of the college is because federal student aid will pay for credit courses. Students cannot get federal student aid to take non-credit courses at the college, and they are non-credit, although we do have credit faculty who teach in the Adult Learning Academy, and they are, in my opinion, absolute heroes who stepped forward to do something really different from what they traditionally do. And, you know, it's up to the college how we're going to try to sustain it. I know that there's interest in sustaining, but right now we are dependent on the TACT funding. But there's no cost to the students.
Okay, great. So the next one, and I know you talked about, you know, you guys kind of created this ABE programming, but somebody asked, I want to know if there's a cutoff score for entry into the program. Was there a level considered too low to enter the program or be entered into the data pool?
So we do use what's called Career Ready 101, which is a pre-test for the work keys assessment. It's 12 questions. There are 4 questions in each of the 3 areas, the reading, locating information, and basic math. And so if a student scores a 0 or a 1, we ask them to go to one of the career centers and go through some remediation there and then come back to us. When we scaled it to the other campus with the corporate donation, we did not do that, just to try to see, you know, what would happen if we didn't have a floor. And it's been fairly successful, but I would say there have been a couple of students that really we were not able to serve because our curriculum, even though it's 2 levels below college level, was still at too advanced a level for them, and then asked, you know, referred them to the Career Center as well for some remediation. It's very, very frustrating to the student to be placed in a situation where they can't really comprehend the very first lesson. And so we do use CR 101.
Okay, excellent. So you talked, like we call you the hybrid site because you guys utilize, you know, the different techniques from unlocking the dream. But one thing that unlocking the gate, I'm sorry, I was thinking achieving the dream in my head. So one of the things that you guys do is you're a very technologically enhanced program setting, and it doesn't look like a regular classroom. Can you talk about some of the approaches that your teachers use in your co-teaching, and what does it look like? What does the ALA look like to an instructor?
So the ALA looks like a computer lab. Every student is sitting at a station that has a computer, and as I said, we're using our learning management system, which is Blackboard, and so everything is in Blackboard. And the teachers are walking around, and so on the literacy side, for example, if we have a couple of students that we know are struggling with grammar in one particular area, we might pull them up to the front of the classroom and do a little mini lesson right there. Grammar is not taught as a separate subject area. There's not like a grammar module. It's just in time or as needed. We're going to teach grammar. On the math side, we might have 2 or 3 students who, even though they started at different times because of our rolling admission, are all struggling with fractions. So we're going to bring them up to the front and just do a mini lesson with them. We've had, since this program started, the Adult Learning Academy has been operating for a little over 4 years now, and we've had a number of faculty, full-time and adjunct, who've come in for a period of time to teach in the Adult Learning Academy. In the very beginning, I think that we don't have them teach right off the bat. We have them observe and then work as an educational assistant and then as one of the instructors. The difference between the educational assistant and the instructor is that the instructor's more involved in tweaking the curriculum and grading, entering grades, but they observe. And if you have somebody who's been teaching for 5 or 10 or 15 years in a lecture environment come into a lab setting, it's very different because you're walking around, you're talking to students, you're checking in with them. You know, how are you doing? Show me what you're working on. Or a student may, you know, ask for help, and you're helping that student one-on-one, and you're in the classroom for normally shifts were 4 to 6 hours. So it's a very different way of teaching. Every one of our faculty who've participated have said they'll never teach the same way again, and it may not be the right environment for everyone. Not everyone wanted to be in the classroom for such long shifts or have so many students at different places in the curriculum, but they took elements of our model into their classrooms. Other individuals have told us, I've never worked this hard, but I don't ever want to go back to teaching in the traditional way. I do think that the teachers themselves have everything to do with positive student outcomes. The teachers have to want to be there, they're friendly, they're supportive, they hold students accountable, they are willing to answer question after question after question, and have a tremendous amount of patience, but they really celebrate every student's success.
Awesome. So I have one last question for you, Diane. There are quite a few questions that are outstanding. So Sue and I are going to move the slide forward once more so that you can get our contact information. That way you can contact myself, Diane, or Deborah if you have any specific questions that we didn't get to attend to today. But the last one I think is really great. So is there a predetermined list of initial interviewing questions or follow-up tasks for the Career Pathways coach? And then more specifically, do you have a specific training you provide, require, or recommend for the coach position? So just setting up the importance of that role.
The coach uses a tool that we've created. It's called a career blueprint. And one of the things, I'm so glad, Gina, that you asked this question and that I'm remembering to tell everyone, all of our curriculum and all of our support material that we've developed will be uploaded to the Skills Commons website. It's a requirement of the TACT grants that anything developed with the federal dollars has to have a Creative Commons license and be shared. So within the next month, I will be uploading all of this material, all of our curriculum, and also some of the supportive tools like that career blueprint. The career blueprint is developed in Excel, and it can be, modified to fit anybody who wanted to use a tool like that. But our career pathway coach, she is just an individual who had a background at one of the career centers, but had also been an employee of the community college. She's taught for continuing education. She is not an ABE instructor. Her background is more career focused, and she does a lot with the students to help with resume development. She teaches work value, work ethics. So I can put up the job description, but I can tell you that in the case of our coach, Lori Hawkins, we were very, very, very lucky. She's an amazing individual.
Great. Thank you so much, Diane. So we're going to wrap up this webinar by just thanking all our presenters, and thank you to the audience members as well for participating and hopping on. We have our contact information here if there's outstanding follow-up questions for either Diane for the project or for Deborah Bragg. So after this webinar, we will be transcribing everything, and so you can always access this back on links again once the transcription and all of that finalizes. Okay, so great. Thanks so much for joining us, and we hope to see you on May 9th.